together and open your word. And Lord, I just thank you for your faithfulness in it, and I thank you for the gift that your word is. And Lord, I just pray that you're honored in it tonight, Lord. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we're going to be in Genesis chapter 29 is where we're going to start. The last couple of weeks we've been looking at Jacob and Esau and Isaac. We saw when Jacob was born, being given that name, being a heel snarer or a supplanter, sort of living up to his reputation and deceiving his brother, deceiving his father, his mother, Rebecca, being a part of that as well. You sort of see this pattern being established in him. Couple quick things to note is, first of all, we've been following this covenant that God made with Abraham, and God's faithfulness in that covenant with Abraham and Sarah, and then it being passed on to Isaac, and then it being passed on to Jacob, and God even telling Rebecca when she was pregnant with Jacob and Esau that the older would serve the younger, that the blessing was already Jacob's, the birthright was already Jacob's, even though he was the younger of the twins. And the Lord confirming that. And then, just kind of, it's a little bit messy for a little bit, and what we're going to look at tonight continues on in that. I mean, it's just still a messy situation, but what's really cool about it is you just see how the Lord uses it. Like, even as we read through this tonight, we're going to cover a lot of ground tonight, but it's a messy situation tonight, and there's a lot of just not great situations that happen. But the Lord uses it, and the Lord's faithful. So last week we ended with, Jacob leaving home because he's fleeing from his brother. His brother is upset. His brother has said he's going to kill Jacob. Esau has said this. So he leaves under the guise of going to find a bride. And Rebecca, in a sort of manipulative way, also goes to Isaac and says, hey, we need to send Jacob back to the land of our father so that he could take a bride from there, so he doesn't take a bride from Canaan. So he leaves under that premise, and essentially it's to wait out his brother's anger. Eventually his brother will kind of get over things, and then it'll get better. But as he goes, what we'll see is it ends up being a pretty significant amount of time, 20 years that he's gone, and he does in fact takes a couple brides in this. And so we're going to cover a lot of ground today, and we're going to talk about this. So Genesis chapter 29, it says, so Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east, and he looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. And they would have a large stone covering the mouth of the well to just keep the water clean, keep the well clean. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, my brethren, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. And he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. So he said to him, is he well? And they said, he is well, and look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Now, again, think about this situation where Jacob is fleeing his brother. His brother is pursuing him. His brother says he's going to kill him as soon as the father dies, as soon as Isaac dies, so he flees. But in that flight, he ends up meeting with the Lord. Last week we talked about the dream that he had where he saw a ladder and the angels ascending and descending on the ladder. And we went to John, and as Jesus talks about that he tells Nathanael that you'll see the Son of Man and the angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man, and seeing this picture of Jesus and the Lord ministering to Jacob, even in the midst of the manipulation and the messiness and all this other stuff that's going on. The Lord is continuing to work, and again, for me, that's such a comforting thing to see how the Lord does that. But here, the Lord directs him as he goes, as he journeys on. he comes to the place, and it's not by coincidence. It's surely from the Lord. He comes to the place of his brother, of his father's family, or his grandfather's family, and his father's family. This is where Rebekah came from. And remember when the servant went out to take a bride for Isaac, for Rebekah, he ended up meeting Laban. That's when we were first introduced to Laban. And you even see this kind of craftiness in Laban at the time, is trying to, he sees that Abraham is wealthy, and that Isaac, or that the servant brings or has at his disposal everything that belongs to his master. And so he kind of brings him in and trying to position himself and posture himself to get something out of the deal. So this is the same Laban. Is he well? They said, he is well, and look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Then he said, look, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go feed them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together. And they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth when we water the sheep. So they're kind of just staging there, waiting for all the flocks to come so that they could roll the stone to water the sheep. Now while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's father, or his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. So you can imagine that this is kind of a weird situation. You have this stranger who rolls the stone away, waters the flock, and then now he's kissing her and crying. And so it's just kind of a weird introduction here. But it says, Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Now it's clicking. Now she knows she understands. She runs and tells her father. And then it came to pass, when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. So the time's going to start to add up. He stays with them for a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Then Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. So, again, Laban is saying to Jacob, look, you're not going to stay here and just serve me for free. What do you want? Basically, name your price. Name your wages. So he has these 2 daughters. It says Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled that I may go into her. Now, it's interesting to note, too. It speaks a lot, I think, of the character of some of the things that we've seen with Jacob, and then with Laban, too, that comes to the end of the 7 years, and then he's the one that has to go out and say, hey, by the way, we had an agreement. We're at 7 years are over. So Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? So Laban made a little switch there in the night of the wedding. And not a little switch, a really big switch. And I don't know if it's because of the veil or what, but it went unnoticed until morning. And so it's kind of interesting because you see how things are coming around to Jacob. Some of the things that Jacob has done, and even disguising himself as his brother. And now he's being kind of the same scheme that he used is being used against him, of one being disguised as her sister. He says, what is it that you have done? We had an agreement. You understood. It was Rachel that I served you for 7 years. Why have you deceived me? And Laban said, it must not be done so. it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. So we have a custom here. This is, I don't know, man. It's just it's almost a pretty typical thing, but he's just saying, hey, we have a custom. The custom is that we give our older daughter before the younger. But you were aware of this 7 years ago. Like you knew of the custom. This isn't like a new custom. So it was just full on, deception from the beginning. So he was aware of it. He says, look, this is the custom. I can't do this. I can't give the younger before the firstborn. He says, fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve me with still another 7 years. So fulfill her week. As you look at the Jewish wedding ceremony and the feast, and it was usually a 7-day long feast, and sort of a honeymoon kind of thing. So he's basically saying, look, fulfill this feast, fulfill her 7 days, and then we'll give you the other one also. Now he gives Rachel to Jacob right away, but he still has to serve for 7 more years. So Laban's getting 14 years of labor out of this little trick. So Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel, his wife, also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another 7 years. So keeping up his end of the bargain, and he stays for another 7 years. So now we're 14 years, or over 14 years in. It says, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Now, as we talk about marriage, we've seen it. It's already come up. It's coming up again, obviously. But this sort of polygamy that you see going on, understand that this is not God's design. This is not pleasing to the Lord. This is not what God desires. Although we see it and the Lord uses it, the Lord still uses it to fulfill his purpose. The Lord's not honored or glorified by it. I think that's an important lesson for us, a very practical lesson for us to all consider too, where just because something seems to be being used, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has God's blessing on it. I think we can deceive ourselves sometimes. It's almost like you could put yourself in Jacob's position, or Abraham, or Isaac, or any of these other situations. Like, well, the Lord made a promise and he's still doing it, so he must be okay with what's going on. I think a lot of times we can find ourselves in a situation of compromise, or even beyond compromise, just straight up rebellion against the Lord, and the Lord's purpose is still going to be fulfilled. The Lord is still going to do what he has said he's going to do, and we have to be really careful and sort of claiming that blessing as far as what the Lord is doing. So the Lord is not honored by this. The Lord's not in it in that sense. However, the Lord's still going to accomplish what he's going to accomplish. That's another thing you hear a lot, and I'm just going to make this point and then we'll move on. But people talk about the Lord being in things, which I think is appropriate, and I think it's true. I think there's obviously there's truth to the fact that if the Lord is in it, it's going to be prosperous, or it's going to be successful, or whatever. I think that's an appropriate thing to say. But again, I think we step back, because I've heard it said the other way around too, that if the Lord's in it, then it's going, we sort of place expectations as to what we think is going to happen if the Lord is in it. But the Lord is looking at things from the perspective of eternity, and he has an eternal purpose that he's working out. And there's some things that happen for short seasons. There's some things that happen for long seasons. Just because something is done for a short season doesn't mean the Lord wasn't in it. You look at somebody like Amos, whose ministry was just a few months. It doesn't mean that the Lord wasn't in his ministry. It's that the Lord accomplished what he set out to accomplish in that season of ministry with him, particularly, and then it was it. So I think a lot of times we have this like earthly idea of success or longevity, and we tie that up into our thought of if the Lord is in it or not. I think that in doing that, we sort of, I think in doing that, we sort of separate ourselves a little bit more from the Lord. Instead of just walking in an intimate proximity with him, instead of just walking in devotion with the Lord and trusting the Lord step by step, I think we use our idea or our expectation of success or blessing as sort of like a litmus of whether the Lord is in it or not. But if we're truly walking in fellowship with the Lord, I think your perspective is much greater than just simply the longevity of something or whatever it might be. So anyways, you see this here with Jacob. It says that when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord had heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also," and she called his name Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi." And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Now I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing children. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." So now we start to see, not only is this whole idea of polygamy a bad idea biblically, it's against what God wants, but then there's just, you think about the extra layers of drama that you're starting to invite and having more people in a home. Even just as you have more, like the more children that are in the home, the more opportunity for drama that there is in the home. So I couldn't imagine a situation like this where there's just the emotions and the jealousy and all the other stuff that starts to creep up. It says, Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, verse 2, and he said, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" So she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I may also have children by her." So kind of the same thing we saw with Abraham and Sarah. And it's just this ongoing idea of having a child with the maid. And she gave him to Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed." So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah her maid and gave her to Jacob as a wife. It keeps going. It's just, you see this competition. It's not even friendly competition. You see this, there's this competition here with the women, and there's just child after child, and this is happening pretty quick. These kids are adding up, and you have 4 different women now that are producing children, so it's adding up really quick. It says, Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "A troop comes," so she called his name Gad. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, "I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed," so she called his name Asher. Now Reuben's still a child. He's 6-7 years old maybe at this point. Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you also take away my son's mandrakes also?" And Rachel said, "Therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." So now they're bargaining Jacob for fruit and all kinds of stuff. And Jacob listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Or God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages, because I have given my maid to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. And Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Now, we know that Jacob had multiple daughters. Dinah is the only one that is named because she comes up again in a little bit. Now, remember, as we're going through, and I've mentioned this before, but there's not enough time, there's not enough pages to go through every genealogy of every family ever. So the names that are sort of relevant to the overall story, those are the ones that we end up reading about and seeing here. Verse 22, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place, to my own country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. And Laban said to him, please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. So Laban is trying to, he's trying to extend it even further. And Jacob is already fulfilled and beyond his obligation to Laban. Something that's interesting here, it says, I have found, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. The word there for experience in the Hebrew is teraphim, which means like a little god or a little idol. And we're going to see in the next chapter that Laban had all these little household gods and all these little household idols. And so he worshipped all these pagan deities. And that's what he's saying. I've learned by experience. I've learned by these little gods that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. I don't know how he learned that or what exactly he learned, but that's what he's saying. Then he said, name me your wages and I will give it. So Jacob said to him, you know I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. And the Lord has blessed you since my coming, and now when shall I also provide for my own house? He's saying, look, I've come here, I came with nothing, I've worked and worked and worked, and everything that you have has increased just exponentially because of all the work that I've done. I need to start providing for my own house now at this point. So they're trying to figure all this out. So he said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all your flocks today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me. And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word. So this is a great deal for Laban starting out, because Jacob's saying, look, of what you currently have, I'm not asking for anything. He said, do this for me. He said, I'll tend your flocks again for a while. And at the end of that time, whatever sheep, whatever goats are speckled or spotted or brown, then those will be mine. He went in, at this point, he goes into all of Laban's flocks, takes the ones that are currently speckled and spotted and brown and separates them so that the flocks that Jacob initially starts to take care of are unspotted, kind of without blemish flocks. And he says, I'll take care of these for a while, and then whatever comes of those that are speckled. So he removes the speckled ones so that the speckled ones aren't already passing on their genes, so that he says that my righteousness will speak for itself. So he separates the flocks, and then Laban's sons take those flocks and they leave. 3 days journey. We'll read that here in a second. They go 3 days journey to separate the flocks that far so that there's not even an opportunity for one of the speckled ones to be breeding with the other ones. It's kind of a win-win for Laban. Laban doesn't have to put up anything at this point. Everything that he has is his, and then just whatever comes of these flocks in the future, for however long, are going to go with Jacob. So Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word. So he removed That day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them to the hand of his sons. Then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So he separated the flocks 3 days' journey. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. So he takes these branches, he peels it back and exposes the white that's on the inside of the branches. It says that, and the rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled and spotted. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he did not put his own flock by themselves, and did not put them with Laban's flocks. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So he has, as far as the branches and the rods and the peeling back and the white, there's a couple different ideas as to why exactly he did that. He does have experience, like he has livestock experience from before, so I'm sure there's experience as far as breeding and genetics and all these other things are concerned. And you can see this even where it got to where he started to have a really clear separation between the stronger of the flocks and then the feeble ones. So whenever the feeble ones came to drink, he wouldn't let them breed. He would only breed the strong ones. And then just through that selective breeding, ended up developing for himself a really impressive flock. Exactly, everything was on the up and up. Everything is exactly according to the deal that they had made. Chapter 31 starts, and it says, Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all his wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him as before. The relationship has changed a bit. It used to be where it was Jacob was the one that was being exploited for so long in this relationship. And now all of a sudden things have kind of shifted a little bit, and it seems as though Jacob is now experiencing some favor from the Lord. He has become exceedingly prosperous in this, and not only that, but on top of it, he's getting ready to take his wives and his children and leave. So, as far as Laban's concerned, he's not only losing a bunch of hands at this point, but then he's losing a good servant in Jacob, and then all the flocks that he's going to take with him as well. Now, when stepping back real quick, he made an agreement to serve Laban for 7 years for Rachel. He was deceived, and he had Leah first and then Rachel after, so it ended up being a total of 14 years. Eventually, it ended up being a total of 20 years that he was there with Laban. But at the time, and it's still customary around a lot of the world, but that there would be a dowry that was paid. When somebody was going to marry a woman, they would pay a dowry to the father of that woman. And basically that dowry was, I've heard it said is it's like advance alimony. And in the case that something happens that, he doesn't treat her right, or they get divorced or something like that, there's something that she has to fall back on. So the dowry ultimately belongs to her. It doesn't belong to the father or anything like that. It's something that's a safety net for the bride. In this case, the dowry ended up being this time of service, these years. But even in that, the fruit from that service, whatever it might have been, whether it's an abundance of crops or flocks or anything like that, that would still be the dowry that was reserved for Leah, and then again for Rachel after that. Now we're going to see here in a second where it says that their father's just already blown their dowry and everything. His countenance was not favorable anymore towards Jacob. The Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you." And that's a good thing to hear. It's kind of cool how the Lord has, it's you can sort of see the stirring in the heart of Jacob as he spends that time there in Haran, as he spends that time working for Laban. And then he gets to this point where he goes to Laban and he says, "Look, it's time to go home. It's time for me to go home. It's time for me to take my family and go home." And the Lord is confirming it here, even saying, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you." So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock and said to them, "I see your father's countenance that is not favorable toward me anymore, or as before, but the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, 'The speckled shall be your wages,' then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, 'The streaked shall be your wages,' then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. And it happened at the time when they saw the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked and speckled and gray spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, 'Jacob,' and he said, 'Here I am.' And I said, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Lift your eyes now and see. All the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family.'" I think about how encouraging that must have been for Jacob to hear this and to see this, and you see the faithfulness of God, and that's something that is just so amazing to me as we even beginning with Abraham and even before that, but in this situation, beginning with Abraham, and then you see it in Isaac, you see it in Jacob, you see the faithfulness of God in the midst of all of the messiness, and the fact that it's I don't want to kind of wildly assume things, but I think it's safe to assume that regardless of what happened with the birthright, regardless of what happened with the blessing, and had Jacob never deceived his father or anything like that, it's likely, it's probable that when it came time for a bride for Jacob, that he still would have gone to Laban to take a bride from Laban. And it's probable, it's likely that Rachel is still the one that the Lord had for him initially. But this is the way that it happened. Just through the manipulation, through the deceit, it kind of went this way. It followed this way. But you see God faithful with Jacob even in that. As he meets him prior to getting to Haran, and as he has the dream, and the Lord encourages him there, and the Lord confirms the covenant with him there. He says the same thing, almost word for word, the covenant that was made to Abraham. And then here you see how the Lord has, even during this time, even this 20 years, the Lord has appeared to Jacob, and the Lord has encouraged Jacob, and the Lord has ministered to Jacob. And then here getting this specific instruction. And you guys know what this is like as we pray for leading, or as we pray for guidance, and sometimes the instructions are very clear. Sometimes the Lord gives us very straightforward instructions, and sometimes the Lord waits on instructions. Sometimes what's required is that we wait. It was that way with Jacob. He had to wait for a good amount of time. But then the Lord gives him very specific instructions. He encourages him. He tells him regarding the flocks, and even just the vindication in the Lord saying, "Look, I've seen how Laban has treated you. Like I know I've seen all that he's doing to you." He says, "Arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family." Just such a cool thing to hear from the Lord. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, "Is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money." So we see a picture again of Laban and sort of his character in that. the dowry, all of anything that belonged to them, their inheritance, all that. He's already blown it all. He's already consumed it all. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. So they're saying, look, what you have, what Rachel and Leah's brothers are saying that Jacob has done and accusing him of stealing from the father. They're saying, look, whatever God has given to you is rightfully ours anyway. It's ours and our children's, and it's just the Lord's making things right. So whatever God said to you, do it. And that's really good advice from a wife also. Then Jacob rose and set his sons and wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And it doesn't really tell us why she did that, but she does. She steals the household idols, and Jacob stole away, unknown to Laban and the Syrian, that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed towards the mountains of Gilead. So Laban takes off. Laban goes out to shear his sheep. He's a good ways away. So Jacob takes advantage of that opportunity and gets out of there. And in the meantime, Rachel steals from her father. Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. So Jacob's got a good head start. He took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." So Laban overtook Jacob. This is kind of a thing I think worth noting too, where we saw this with we saw this earlier with when they went into Egypt with Abraham. We saw it again with Isaac, where these people who are essentially the enemy, the Lord intervenes and the Lord speaks to them. And even on behalf these guys, as Jacob, as Isaac, as Abraham, as they're finding themselves in places of compromise, they're finding themselves making poor decisions, the Lord is still carrying them through it, and the Lord is still protecting them. And I think that this is such an interesting thing, that one of the ways that the Lord is protecting them is through warning the ones that are pursuing them. God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have stolen away unknown to me, and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp," which we know that that's not true. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in doing so. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you." For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So you see the fear, and just this response shows, Laban overtakes them, and he says, "Look, why did you do this? Why did you take my daughters? I would have sent you away. I would have done," which is not true. That wouldn't have happened. And I think Jacob's response kind of shows it a little bit too, that, just the fear, that perhaps you would have taken your daughters from me by force. But then he says, wherever you find your gods, if you find your gods with any of my people, let them not live. He didn't know that that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. And he searched but did not find the household idols. So she's sitting on them. And she said to her, it's just funny, like, I don't know, they were in the saddle. I don't know, she's like, I can't get up, so don't be upset with me. It's like, look everywhere, but except for where I'm sitting. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was, and the day that the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. And that's such a cool thing, man, to be able to just rest in the protection of the Lord, to know that the Lord is in control, to know that the Lord protects. And you know, I just think about that and where we're at today, and the just our life today, the state of the world today. You know, even things that are on the horizon, things that we're looking forward to or maybe not looking forward to, whatever it might be, the Lord is in control and the Lord protects. And God saw his affliction. God was in control. God saw this and protected Jacob in this situation. And unless the Lord had seen that, unless the Lord had protected Jacob, sure, and it probably would have been the case that Laban would have sent him away empty-handed. But the Lord protected him. And the Lord does that for us too. It's amazing. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock. Which is funny, because that's not exactly true. None of that's true, actually. These daughters, these women are Jacob's wives. These children are Jacob's children, and it's Jacob's flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? And you see how he's almost playing the victim here. Like, these are all my things. These are my children and my flocks and my daughters, and everything here, everything that you see is mine. It belongs to me, but there's nothing I can do about it. Now, therefore, come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Jegar-sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. It both means a heap of witness, but in Aramaic and then in Hebrew. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore its name was called Galeed, also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. So this isn't really a great oath, as far as like, it's not like these guys are partying and leaving on good terms with each other. He's saying, look, we're going to make this oath, and what this oath is going to determine or say is that God's watching. So even when we depart from each other, even when I can't see you, if you do something wrong, God sees it. So it's not necessarily a pleasant oath that's being made here. It says, this heap is a witness, and this, 51. Then Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judged between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. That's where we're going to stop tonight. Just kind of a quick recap. Again, you see Jacob stepping back to where we were the last couple weeks with the deception at home and manipulating his brother to steal his birthright, and then again to steal the blessing, and disguising himself as his brother, and Rebekah being a part of that, and just this whole mess that's going on. A birthright that already belonged to Jacob. He's being deceptive, he's manipulating, he's stealing something that already has been promised to him, that already belongs to him. But then after he does that, he flees from his brother, he flees to this area, to Haran, and he ends up coming into contact with Laban's family, is tricked by Laban. He loves Rachel. He serves for 7 years so that he could marry Rachel. Laban makes this switch with Leah. He serves another 7 years, and you just see him kind of getting a taste of his own medicine, just the manipulation and everything being turned back to him. Eventually, he gets to the point where him and all of those kids, tons of kids, they all leave and they're starting to make their way back. Laban pursues after him. Just an ugly mess. And then eventually they come to this place where they pretty much put up a border. And it's like, look, this is the covenant that we'll make. None of us are crossing over this border again. Like, we're staying, at least for harm. You're going to stay there. I'm going to stay here. He blesses his family and he departs from there. Next week, as we get into this, we're going to look at where Esau finally comes and meets Jacob, which is really interesting. But Genesis chapter 32, especially the end of chapter 32, is really, really cool. I'm really excited about it. It's probably one of my favorite sections in all of Scripture. So it's okay. You need directions. But I would encourage you guys to read ahead. Obviously, I say that every week, but read ahead. Read Genesis chapter 32. I'm really, really excited about getting into that, because ultimately what you end up seeing as we get into Genesis chapter 32 is this relationship with Jacob when he wrestles with the Lord, and his name's changed from Jacob to Israel. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up there. I'll pray, and then we can cut it off. Father, we thank you again for this evening. And Lord, there's so much to learn. There's as we follow these stories, Lord, I just pray that you help us to always read these and pray through these things with the understanding that all Scripture is God-breathed and is profitable, and there's purpose in it, Lord. And these aren't just stories to read. They're not just accounts to be familiar with, Lord, but there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to apply from these things. Lord, I pray that you would help us to be holy, Lord, that we would walk in you, that our trust would be placed in you, Lord, that we see that you are a God who protects, and that you're a God who leads, and that you're a God that's involved, and that you care. And Lord, I pray that you would help us to rest in that. And Lord, I just thank you for all that you're doing. Lord, I thank you for this fellowship. I thank you for this city and the work that you're doing here, Lord. And our heart is to be found faithful. And Lord, we do pray that you would continue to provide and direct and just show us what it is you would have us do. Lord, in the meantime, I pray that you would fill us each fresh with your Spirit, Lord, as we go home tonight, as we go about the rest of our weeks, Lord. I just pray that we would be faithful in whatever it is that you've put in front of us. Lord, I pray that our fellowship with each other would be sweet, and our fellowship with you would be sweet, and that you'd be glorified in it, Lord. And we do pray that you would come quickly. Lord, just as Jacob is exhausted there at Laban's, it's the same feeling that we have, Lord, that we have a home that we are desperate for. But Lord, as long as you tarry, I just pray that you would help us to be faithful. And we just ask this all in